He was a godly man, an imperfect man, and wanted to tell the entire world about his imperfections.
He has these conditions. They do not seem like he's getting.
Phil Robertson didn't just walk away from the spotlight. He built an empire with mud on his boots and conviction in his bones. But behind the camo, the beard, and the headlines, there's a final twist to his story, one that stunned even those closest to him. His death in 2025 wasn't just the end of a chapter. It uncovered something that hit his family harder than anyone expected. What did he really leave behind? And why did it make them cry? Stay with us, because this ending doesn't go the way you think. Roots of a rugged childhood. Phil Robertson's early life was marked by hardship and survival, not luxury or comfort. Born in the small town of Vivian, Louisiana, he was the fifth of 7 children in a family that lived well below the poverty line. Their home in Caddo Parish was a simple wooden shack, no electricity, no indoor plumbing, and little insulation from the humid southern climate. For the Robertsons, every day was about getting by. While some might view these conditions as unbearable, for Phil, it was the only life he knew. This upbringing shaped his resilience and taught him that success wasn't something you inherited. It had to be hunted, earned, and defended. In the absence of modern conveniences, Phil learned to find abundance in the natural world around him. The swamps and woods of northwestern Louisiana became his classroom. By the time he could walk, he was helping his siblings track game and catch fish. Hunting wasn't a pastime, it was a necessity. His tools were basic: a homemade fishing pole, a borrowed .22 rifle, and an instinct honed by daily exposure to the wild. Whether it was cleaning a squirrel for supper or stalking a deer through thick woods, Phil's early years were steeped in lessons of self-reliance. These skills wouldn't just feed his family, they would become the foundation of his later empire. Phil's parents, James and Merritt Robertson, worked hard to keep the family afloat. James took jobs in the oil fields and sharecropped to make ends meet, while Merritt stretched every ingredient she could find into meals that fed 9 mouths. She made squirrel stew, fried fish, and cooked wild greens. Nothing was wasted. Watching his parents persevere despite constant struggle gave Phil a clear example of grit and determination. There were no handouts, no shortcuts, only what you could grow, catch, or create yourself. These values stayed with him well into adulthood. School was another challenge altogether. Phil never quite fit in. He found more meaning in tracking ducks than solving math equations. It wasn't that he lacked intelligence, he simply wasn't interested in what traditional education offered. While other students prepared for careers in towns and cities, Phil's heart remained in the swamp. Looking back, it's not surprising he would later turn his knowledge of duck calls and outdoor life into a multi-million-dollar brand. The groundwork was laid in those early, raw years, where character wasn't taught in classrooms but carved out in the mud, trees, and bayous of Louisiana. Even recreation had a purpose in Phil's early years. Free time was rare, and when it came, it often meant more labor, hauling water, cutting firewood, or helping his father repair old tools and hunting gear. It wasn't play in the conventional sense, but it taught Phil the satisfaction of being useful. His closest companions weren't peers at school, but animals in the wild and the siblings who shared his struggles. He became fluent in the rhythms of the woods, when the fish bit, when the ducks migrated, and where deer tracks meant fresh game. These weren't hobbies. They were survival tools that eventually became business instincts. For Phil, discipline didn't come from a coach or a classroom, but from the demands of nature. Just when it seemed like the swamp had fully shaped his destiny, another unexpected arena put Phil's grit to the test: under stadium lights. The star quarterback who walked away. Phil Robertson's athletic talent stood in stark contrast to his humble beginnings. After excelling in high school football in Louisiana, he earned a spot at Louisiana Tech University as the team's starting quarterback in 1964. Most notably, he played ahead of Terry Bradshaw, who would go on to become a Hall of Fame NFL quarterback with 4 Super Bowl rings. Coaches and scouts quickly took notice of Phil's strong arm and natural leadership on the field. NFL interest was serious. In another life, he might have worn a pro jersey, but that wasn't the path he wanted. Football, for Phil, was never more than a game. Hunting was life. While others saw dollar signs and fame in his future, Phil saw constraints. The structure, discipline, and media attention that came with a football career didn't appeal to him. He valued freedom, time outdoors, and a way of life rooted in nature. Even while at Louisiana Tech, he would skip practice or class during duck season to head into the woods. This wasn't a rebellious act. It was a reflection of what truly fulfilled him. He later said that he never regretted walking away from football, even though many questioned the decision at the time. His choice showed an early defiance of cultural expectations, a decision that would shape the independent path he later carved in business and media. After leaving football behind, Phil earned both a bachelor's and a master's degree in education. He briefly tried coaching and teaching at a high school, likely as a means to stay connected to football and provide for his growing family. However, it didn't last. The structure of classroom life was too rigid, and his heart wasn't in it. It became clear that Phil was not wired for conventional career paths. He was restless, searching for a vocation that matched his identity and values. That search would eventually lead him back into the wilderness, where he found both peace and purpose. Phil's decision to step away from a potential NFL career may seem unthinkable to many, but for him, it was an act of clarity. He understood what made him feel alive. In retrospect, that decision foreshadowed everything that followed. Whether it was founding Duck Commander or becoming the face of a cultural movement through Duck Dynasty, Phil built a life not around public expectations, but around personal conviction. His departure from football wasn't a step down. It was a step toward authenticity. Dark decade, the bar, the bottle, and the brink. The 1970s marked the darkest period in Phil Robertson's life, a time defined by poor decisions, heavy drinking, and escalating volatility. After leaving behind football and a brief attempt at teaching, Phil took over a rough bar in Arkansas, known more for brawls than beer sales. He operated the wagon wheel with little structure and even less stability. Customers came for the chaos as much as the alcohol, and Phil matched that energy with a growing addiction to whiskey and a quick temper. What started as a means to make a living quickly spiraled into a destructive lifestyle that pushed him further away from the values he'd grown up with. Alcohol soon became the central force in his life. It didn't just affect Phil personally, it destabilized everything around him. He was frequently absent from home, often returning late or not at all, leaving his wife Kay and their young sons to fend for themselves. His erratic behavior became a source of fear and disappointment for his family. Friends and relatives recall moments when Phil was barely recognizable, physically present, but emotionally and spiritually lost. This wasn't a temporary detour, it was a years-long spiral that saw Phil ignoring responsibility and increasingly isolating himself from the people who needed him most. His self-destruction reached a breaking point during a violent bar incident where a fight escalated beyond what even Phil was prepared to handle. After knocking a man unconscious, he fled into the Louisiana woods to avoid legal consequences. For a time, He lived off the grid, surviving by hunting and fishing, an outlaw in his own community. He later admitted he was running from more than just the law. He was avoiding accountability, his family, and even God. The solitude gave him time to reflect, but it didn't immediately change his behavior. It was a low point, both morally and emotionally, and one that nearly cost him everything. By the late 1970s, Phil's relationship with his family was in tatters. Kay was raising 4 boys alone, and the gap between who Phil had become and who he once was had never been wider. His sons, too young to fully understand, were growing up in a home shadowed by instability. While this era of Phil's life is rarely glorified, it played a critical role in the story that followed. The pain he caused and later confronted became the foundation for his eventual transformation. This chapter may have been defined by failure, but it also revealed the depth of change he would need to pursue in order to reclaim his life and restore his family. Kay's love and the power of redemption. By the mid-1970s, Phil Robertson's life was unraveling, and his family was paying the price. Kay Robertson, his wife since 1966, had endured years of his growing instability, raising 4 young boys in a household increasingly marked by absence, fear, and broken promises. While Phil's barroom lifestyle spiraled deeper into chaos, Kay remained a steady presence at home. But even her patience had limits. In 1975, she reached a breaking point and delivered a direct ultimatum. Either Phil would change, or she would take the children and leave. Her words weren't threats. They were born of desperation, a final plea for the man she once knew to return. Kay's resolve came from a place of love, but it also came with risk. Phil, at that point, had little accountability and no clear direction. Still, something in her words struck a chord. It was the beginning of a turning point. Not long after, a local preacher named Bill Smith entered Phil's life. Smith wasn't a polished televangelist. He was someone who knew the swamp, knew its people, and spoke plainly. He sat down with Phil, not to condemn, but to challenge him. Stop running, face your sins, and accept that God had something better in store. It was a conversation that cut through Phil's defenses. Later that same year, Phil made a public decision that would mark the start of his transformation. At 28 years old, he was baptized in a muddy Louisiana river, a symbolic and spiritual cleansing in the very waters he had grown up fishing. This wasn't a one-time fix. Phil would later describe the battle that followed as one of the hardest of his life. Quitting alcohol cold turkey, rebuilding relationships, and facing the damage he had caused. But it was also the moment when redemption became possible. With faith as his new anchor, and Kay still by his side, Phil began putting the pieces of his life back together, this time with purpose. Kay's decision to stay, forgive, and rebuild with Phil is a testament to the strength of her character and belief in second chances. While others might have walked away, she saw the man buried beneath years of failure. Her love, paired with Phil's newfound faith, created the foundation for everything that followed, from a restored family to a global business empire. Without this crucial turning point, there would be no Duck Commander, no Duck Dynasty, and no legacy. It was Kay's ultimatum and Phil's response that saved not just their marriage, but the future of the Robertson name. Carving a business from cedar and grit. The seeds of Phil Robertson's business success were planted not in a boardroom, but in a small backyard shed in Louisiana. In 1972, frustrated with the quality of store-bought duck calls, Phil decided to make his own. He believed the mass-produced models sounded artificial, nothing like the birds he'd studied his whole life. Driven by his deep understanding of waterfowl and a perfectionist's ear, he began carving duck calls by hand from blocks of cedar, tuning each one until it could fool a wild duck. This wasn't a hobby. It was an obsession born from necessity and sharpened by experience. That same year, he officially founded Duck Commander, a one-man operation at the start. To support the fledgling business, Phil worked side jobs, including commercial fishing, while Kay managed the household and helped keep the books. Their sons, still children at the time, pitched in by packaging calls on the kitchen table. Every part of the process was kept in the family, not because it was trendy, but because it was the only option they could afford. Sales were modest in the beginning. Phil would drive from bait shop to bait shop, offering his duck calls for a few bucks each, often sweetening the deal with stories from the swamp. What made Duck Commander different wasn't just the product, it was the authenticity behind it. Phil's calls weren't designed for shelf appeal, they were made to work in the field. For hunters, that mattered. Word of mouth spread among outdoor enthusiasts who trusted a man who lived the lifestyle he promoted. Phil wasn't some businessman playing outdoorsman. He was the real thing, and that credibility slowly built a loyal customer base. In an industry that often prioritizes flashy branding, Duck Commander's grassroots growth stood out. By focusing on craftsmanship and community, Phil built more than a product. He built a reputation. Those early days of Duck Commander are foundational to the Robertson family's story. Before the reality shows and retail success, there was just a shed, a knife, and a belief that a better duck call could change their fortunes. Looking back, it's clear that Phil's decision to bet on his skills and instincts was pivotal. It didn't just lead to financial stability, it created the platform that would eventually turn his family into household names. Duck Commander wasn't built with investors or capital, it was carved out of cedar, sweat, and second chances. What started with a carved duck call in a backyard shed was about to find its voice on grainy tape, and unexpectedly, in living rooms across America. From VHS tapes to retail giants. As Duck Commander slowly gained momentum in the 1980s, Phil Robertson began looking for new ways to connect with hunters beyond his handmade calls. That's when he turned to something simple but powerful: homemade hunting videos. Using a borrowed camcorder, he filmed duck hunts that weren't just instructional, they were personal. Phil would explain techniques, showcase the effectiveness of his calls, and talk about life, family, and faith, all from the heart of the Louisiana wilderness. These grainy VHS tapes were passed around hunting communities and sold at local shops. They weren't slick, but they were real, and they resonated with the very people Phil was trying to reach. By the 1990s, the next generation of Robertsons started stepping in with their own ideas. Jace Robertson, with his keen attention to sound and function, refined the duck call designs, while Willie Robertson, who had studied business, focused on expanding the brand's reach. Willie saw potential far beyond regional sales and began pushing for larger-scale production, better packaging, and broader retail distribution. Under his direction, Duck Commander's branding was updated to appeal to a national audience, without losing the authenticity that had made it successful in the first place. That push into professionalization marked a major shift. The company expanded from kitchen table packaging to commercial manufacturing and logistics. Calls began appearing in sporting goods stores across the country, including Bass Pro Shops, Cabela's, and eventually Walmart. The once humble family business was now a player in the outdoor retail market. But even with commercial success, the company never distanced itself from its roots. The family maintained a presence in all aspects of the operation, keeping the story and faces behind the product front and center. Customers weren't just buying duck calls. They were buying into a lifestyle and a philosophy. This period of growth also laid the groundwork for the media attention that would eventually catapult the Robertsons into mainstream culture. The early videos Phil made had unintentionally proven that his charisma worked on camera. Combined with the family's growing business and distinct personalities, they had the raw material for something much bigger. Before any network deals or reality shows, Duck Commander had already evolved into a nationally known brand. It had become clear that this wasn't just a family business, it was a movement, with products, media, and values all wrapped into one recognizable name. Redneck royalty in prime time. When A&E approached the Robertson family in the early 2010s with the idea of a reality TV show, Phil Robertson was skeptical. He didn't care for cameras or producers and was far more comfortable in a duck blind than on a soundstage. However, his son Willie saw an opportunity. With the family business already booming and their story rooted in authenticity, Willie believed a reality series could share their faith, humor, and lifestyle with a broader audience. After much discussion, the family agreed, and on March 21st, 2012, Duck Dynasty premiered. What happened next was beyond anything they had imagined. The show was an instant hit. Viewers were drawn to the dynamic mix of backwoods humor, Christian values, and family-centered storytelling. Phil, the patriarch, quickly became the heart of the show. His signature beard, unfiltered wisdom, and old-school views stood out in a television landscape increasingly focused on polished personalities. His phrases like "happy, happy, happy" and "if it ain't in the Bible, I don't need it" became pop culture staples. Unlike scripted TV, Duck Dynasty felt real, and that authenticity became its biggest asset. At its peak, the show drew 11.8 million viewers, making it one of the most successful reality series in cable history. Duck Dynasty's success was far beyond ratings. It was the launching pad for a huge merchandise empire that created the Robertsons as household names. From books and calendars to camo and board games, Duck Commander products covered store shelves. The fans were not only watching, they were buying the brand. Phil and the family became icons of a cultural identity rooted in faith, family, and simple living. Phil, however, began standing on the message, not the money. He used it to advance his message, sharing openly his values with audiences he felt were underrepresented in mainstream media. Phil, though, was independent through it all. He regularly disagreed with the producers if he felt there was a scripted element to the show, or if it felt manipulated. One director recalled Phil quitting a shoot halfway through to go fishing, saying, "Y'all got enough." That resistance to compromise was central to the spirit of the show. Without Phil being Phil, it just could not function. Duck Dynasty went on for 11 seasons and 130 episodes, becoming a cultural reference point for millions. It was more than a television show. It became the conduit through which Robertsons propagated their values, and a testimony of how an unvarnished voice from the Louisiana swamps could make a lasting impact in American pop culture. The 2013 firestorm, Faith versus Fame. In December 2013, Phil Robertson found himself at the center of a nationwide media storm. In an interview with GQ magazine, he was asked to share his views on sin and morality, and he responded with blunt, Bible-based commentary. His remarks included criticisms of homosexuality and other behaviors he deemed sinful, citing Scripture as his source. Though Robertson made it clear that his views stemmed from his religious convictions, the public reaction was immediate and polarizing. A&E, the network airing Duck Dynasty, responded swiftly by suspending Phil from the show, citing concerns over the offensive nature of his comments. The backlash was massive, but not in the way many media observers expected. Instead of diminishing Phil's reputation, the suspension galvanized a large segment of his fan base. Hashtags like #StandWithPhil trended across social media, and conservative commentators framed the incident as an attack on Christian values and free speech. Support poured in from religious leaders, politicians, and viewers, who saw the suspension as an example of cultural overreach. For many, Phil wasn't just a reality TV star, he had become a voice for those who felt their beliefs were increasingly unwelcome in public discourse. In just 9 days, A&E reversed its decision and reinstated Phil Robertson to the show. The change of heart by the network did not only reveal the strength of popular support, but it also answered an economic reality. Duck Dynasty was one of its most profitable franchises. Much as the controversy was troubling, it gave only added visibility to the show. Phil's unedited persona, once a risk in marketing, is now more than part of his appeal. It was a turning point, though. For a couple more seasons, the show was still on, but the Robertson name became less attached to its brand or humor and more to its position on cultural and religious issues. Phil never gave an apology. During interviews that followed, he leaned on the "I was simply quoting the Bible" defense all the more, along with love for other people, even those with whom he disagreed. For his supporters, this response only confirmed his genuineness. For his detractors, it highlighted the widening gulf in American culture. It did not matter which side you took. The controversy in 2013 would forever mark Phil Robertson as more than a reality television personality. He had become an icon of faith, rural conservatism, and the battle over who is allowed to speak freely in modern America. A life beyond the limelight. After Duck Dynasty ended in 2017, Phil Robertson stepped back from mainstream media attention. But he didn't disappear. While he handed over the day-to-day leadership of Duck Commander to his sons Willie and Jace, Phil remained deeply involved in shaping the family's spiritual direction and values. He transitioned from being a public reality TV figure to becoming a more focused evangelist and cultural commentator. He no longer needed a camera crew to share his views. His voice found a new platform, this time with fewer filters and more control. Phil's next chapter centered around the Unashamed podcast, which he co-hosted with his sons. The show gave Phil a space to speak candidly about faith, politics, culture, and personal growth, often tying in scripture and lessons from his own life. Unlike television, the podcast allowed long-form discussion, giving listeners a deeper understanding of his convictions. With thousands of loyal followers, Unashamed became a vehicle for extending the Robertson message beyond duck calls and merchandise. For Phil, this wasn't about holding on to fame, it was about using his platform to lead others toward what he believed was the truth. There was a time when books were also part of Phil's legacy from television. Several of his works included Happy, 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 The Theft of America's Soul, and Jesus Politics. They expounded upon his worldview and transformed him from being a brawler into a fervent believer. Such a stain on many of the changes that Phil underwent in the eyes of the whole world. He became the man not easily intimidated by the mainstream and speaking so openly, truths decrying all odds. Through all the criticisms of his positions, one could only agree. His fame was beyond doubt in conservative circles of Christianity. His putting pen to paper gave the followers not merely entertainment, but a tradition-based philosophy founded on biblical interpretation. Phil was now out of the sight of the public, but did not retreat into retirement. He was often there within the growing media measure of the family. Phil continued to touch base with the lifestyle of a simple, faith-driven family roots in various activities, either speaking at church or hunting with grandkids. Beyond that, a businessman or television figure, Phil had become a spiritual patriarch. By relinquishing the operational control of the family business to the next generation while continuing to guide them with principle and purpose, he ensured that the Robertson name would mean more than duck calls: conviction, endurance, and legacy. Even as Phil's voice grew quieter in public, something profound was quietly building behind the scenes, until the final moment no one was ready for. Passing the torch and eternal faith. Phil Robertson passed away in May 2025 at the age of 79, following a difficult battle with Alzheimer's and related health complications. His death marked the end of an extraordinary life that had moved from rural poverty to national prominence, from chaos to redemption. While the news of his passing had been anticipated by those closest to him due to his declining health, it still struck an emotional chord across the country. His family, friends, and longtime supporters mourned not only the man, but also what he represented: a steadfast voice rooted in faith, family, and resilience. The official announcement came from Willie and Corey Robertson, who released a statement highlighting Phil's unwavering devotion to God, even in his final days. They described him as a man who faced life and death with courage and spiritual clarity. According to the family, Phil remained lucid enough in his final months to express gratitude and speak openly about his trust in God's plan. There was no fear, only peace. His final moments, they said, were consistent with the way he had lived since his transformation decades ago: firm in faith, surrounded by loved ones, and grounded in the values he preached. Phil Robertson's death has been partially attributed to rumors about his family estate of $10 million, which sounds quite small by comparison to the many millions of media and merchandise empire that they have constructed. But for anyone who truly knew Phil or understood any part of his journey, where he stood, or more importantly, sat, was not in the areas of material success. What mattered to him was legacy, spiritual, familial, and cultural. He left a family to continue spreading his message. Willie and Jace lead Duck Commander with the same grit and authenticity, while the Unashamed podcast remains a popular platform for sharing biblical teachings and personal reflections. Tributes would pour in from religious leaders and fans alike, and even critics who acknowledged the very impactful culture that Phil produced among others after he passed away. Some even speculated whether some studios would be interested in making his story into a movie or documentary, telling how he changed and what he did. These possibilities are still unpredictable in the future, but it is clear that the Robertson family plans not to let it die. Through continuing ministry, business, and public outreach, they keep alive the tenets under which he lived. In short, he left a framework to live by with purpose, conviction, and unshakable faith rather than by fortune. Thanks for watching. If Phil Robertson's story moved you, hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives just like this. And hey, don't stop here. Click the next video on your screen to keep the story going.